Okay, so one of the things I wanted to show you is I did something a little different with this system. This has been a long, long road of development for us, but I did something different with permissions with this system that I hadn't really thought about doing quite this way before. And I've been actually very pleased with how it's worked out, and I thought I'd just share an example of something that seems to have some significant benefits. So, as we all know, is that we're doing security. If we have to go in and manage security and set up in detail everything in our privilege set, and we have to go in and we have to do custom everything for all of our fields and layouts and all these privileges. Going in and doing that and tweaking and modifying it's a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of time, and it's often something that we can't put in front of our end users and say, well, yeah, so you got a new user? Yeah, just go in and do this, and this, and everything will be great. It's too much for them. It's too much for us, and it can be a real hassle to manage. So one of the things that many of us have done in the past is we've created a staff or an employee table for all the users of that system, and then we've created a set of permissions that are simply a set of checkbox flags. So I've done this in many systems before, but one thing I did a little bit different here was that I put the permissions in a completely separate table that's related to the staff. So we know that if we've got a staff table and a staff permissions table, we draw that in the relationships graph and we say, oh yeah, that's a one-to-many because we're using the staff ID, which is our primary key. And on the permissions table, we say, well, that can be one-to-many. Now, it will be one-to-many if we put permissions in a portal, but if we simply put the fields on the layout, not within a portal, and we have that relationship set to create, what that allows us to do is to add fields to our staff permissions, and then as soon as you click one of those checkboxes there, boom, we've created one record, and because that record is created, all those other checkboxes here are still part of that one-to-one, that one record. So we have, in effect, a one-to-one relationship rather than a one-to-many, simply because we're not allowing the user to create multiple permission records for the user. So what I did with this, or the reason that I did this is that this company, Helmer Printing, it's an amazing company with some extraordinarily talented people. And they actually have 4 different businesses. So we've got the owners, and then some office admin, and then we've got 4 distinct businesses that have their own logos, their own addresses, their own jobs, their own. It's a lot. And then some of the people can actually have permissions in multiple locations, and other people can only see the jobs and estimates just for their location. So we do a number of things to choose what their default location was, whether they were temporary staff members, the permissions that we're giving them, the value lists that we would put them in, et cetera. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the permissions. So the thing that was that kind of drove this to set this up this way is that we had a very small number of people who we needed to give authorization to say, yep, we have a new user, they can see this, they can do that, they can do these other things, but we didn't want them to have to go into managed security. That was way too much for them. I wanted to make this quick, I wanted to make this simple. But if we had to go in and say all of these checkbox fields where this user can, were in the staff table, every time we added, oh, well, we've got a new thing that we need to lock off. We need to go into manage security, go to each privilege set and choose who gets to see and do what with that. And it just got to be a lot. So by moving our permissions into a separate table, it was easy to say there's only one group, well, full access, and then this management group. They're the only ones who can edit records in that table. So that permission is once and done. Very simple. But when management sets up a new user, they're clicking the checkboxes here. Nobody has to go into manage permissions, et cetera. It's a really, really simple thing to set up. So I like the fact that because all the permissions are stored in a single table, it made the management of everything else easier. So if we've got a new permissions record, we're simply adding a new field in this table. You can see there are a lot of them already set up, but it's simple to add a field when you get to the point of needing to do that. These have an auto enter. Of the self, so whatever's in there plus 0. I wanted to force it to get a 0 in there whenever a new record was created. So everything starts out as 0 rather than leaving it blank. There's something in my mind about I'd like seeing that there's something there and I know what that is versus it's an empty field and I don't know why it's empty. So it's a proactive way of getting a value into the field. And if they've checked the flag, then it's always going to be 1 plus 0, which is going to be 1. So we've got the staff permissions table, and it's very simple to add an additional field in there, and we've got its primary key and then a link, of course, to the staff record right there as a foreign key. So one of the things that I found as I was doing this is that, you know, it was nice to be able, and let me go to a new record that I created. It's user. And I've logged in on a different copy of FileMaker here, and I'm in the estimate here, and I'm looking at estimate cost breakdown. You can see that right now we've got your permissions to not allow you to view this information. This user in this window is logged in as user. And here's our user, and right now user doesn't have permissions to view the estimate cost breakdown and job costs, or if it's a retail breakdown, they don't have permissions to view that. So by checking these here and committing those records, when I go over here, now the user who's logged in automatically can see the details of that record. And again, the management who wants to own who gets to see and do what, they're just clicking check boxes in the staff record. As soon as that record's committed, okay, you can see those now. So it even allows them to say, I'm going to take away those permissions because they've done something they shouldn't, or to temporarily add them. I mean, you can do any number of things. And it simply is a matter of checking check boxes as they go. So the one thing I found a little difficult, again, because of the nature of the business, is that they have had users, it's a family-owned business, so the last name Helmer, you're going to find a lot of Helmers, and you might have a first name and, you know, J. Helmer for Jenny Helmer, or J. Helmer for Jim Helmer, or J. Helmer for Joe Helmer. There can be a lot. So based on how people have come and gone, you know, family and the kids have grown up and, you know, all this, plus just normal users, one of the things that we decided to do is to keep our login account names separate from the staff ID, the ID of the staff records. So you can see here we've got in the account setup, we have a login name that we have set up so that when we have a login that's set up, people will log in as user, whatever, with their password. But the ID for our staff record is a different ID, something that does not change. So if we've got somebody that comes and goes, or, you know, Jenny retires and now Julie shows up, and can she use J. Helmer again? Yes, we can set that up. There's a whole part to that. But we decided to keep the staff ID separate from the account name because it just makes sure that we know and have consistent control over everything in the system. So unfortunately what that did is when somebody logs in, they don't log in with the UUID of their staff record. They don't have that anymore. So we have to use the login name. So when somebody logs in, we know what their account name is, but we don't know what their staff ID is. And the staff ID is what's used to connect everything across the system. It's like, oh, so I can use XUSQL to find that, et cetera, but that's just a pain. So I created a custom function that has really worked out nicely. And I'm calling it isAuthorized. And it's a longer function, but what it does is it requires 4 fields as parameters. One, we want to know what is the login name field in that staff record, because that's what somebody's going to type in. I'm going to type in J. Medema as my login name. I also want to know the table where the record ID is for the staff. So their user ID, excuse me, the record ID. I need to know the permissions table and what its staff ID field is called. And in the permissions table, I want to know which specific flag field. The user can see this, user can do that, etc. So the custom function, again, there's a lot of commenting in here, etc., but allows us to say, you log in as whatever your username is, and I'm going to reference that in the staff table. I'm going to grab your ID. Now I'm going to go over to the permissions table and look for the staff ID, which could be a long UUID. And then I'm going to grab the value in that flag field. So the custom function is long in here, as sometimes custom functions are. But how it works out here, oh, I'm not logged in as somebody with permissions. Let me go to estimates here. Go to layout mode first. And now because I've got a custom function, if I ever want to turn on a show hide, it's easy for me to go into my hide object when and select my is authorized. Let me break this down so it's a little easier to see. And with this, all I'm doing then is kind of replacing this as we go. And this is the login name field. And the record ID in the staff table. And the staff ID in the permissions table. And the specific permissions flag field, so I'll submit large POs. And that's all I do. And now, because we don't have this checked, let me get back to logged in as myself here. I think I moved that checkbox field. So anyway, the goal of that whole custom function is to be able to point to a layout object and do a show hide immediately with that. The other things you can do with that is in your script workspace, you can easily set up an if statement is authorized, and it'll return a 1 or a 0. So the thing I found that was really helpful is that I didn't have to retype out that execute SQL statement all the time. And it allowed me to choose where my permissions table was and which specific field I was looking at. And it didn't take a whole lot of time to all start making some sense and saving some significant time. And then of course, because the permissions table is all in one place, I could easily limit who gets to set and remove those.
So that runs off of the execute SQL.
Yes.
And that means it'll survive find mode too, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the big advantage, of course, is it's context independent.
Exactly. Exactly. So, anyway, I thought it was kind of slick, and it's worked out well and saved some time and simplified some things in ways that I wasn't initially anticipating. So it's kind of, honestly, a bit of a surprise on the backside. So, anyway, that's what I found. Matthew?
Curious if the first 3 input parameters to your function
Mm-hmm.
need to be input parameters at all. Couldn't you code those directly into the custom function so that you just do is authorized and then whatever field you're interested in finding out if there's
I could absolutely code those in, hard code those. I could, and it would work within that solution. It would always work within that solution, yes,
Yeah, if you want it to be portable,
yes.
well, but you still have fields in the custom function, so it wouldn't be portable anyway.
True. Yeah, you could break that up, because the staff file will always be called the staff file in here. Yeah.
The ID field in the staff table will always be the ID field in the staff
Mm-hmm.
table.
Yep. Yeah, good actually. It's a good idea. So, anytime I throw something out there, I like to hear, is anybody else doing anything that is interesting, or, that you like better or different or can improve upon, which Matthew just did, that people talk about or share?
Yeah, so me and John are working on a client solution that has the same crazy requirements for whatever. And we came up with sort of a similar thing in that you can choose users, but also a group level to it as well.
Mm.
So if they're part of this company, that's automatically part of the group, and you don't have to be so granular, I guess, with your users.
Right.
But we're reaching through the connector paradigm, the add-on to the incongruity thing, and
Mm-hmm.
so the SQL thing is kind of interesting too. Like maybe boy, that's a place to choose. But yeah, we're kind of getting going on that big project.
In the same kind of paradigm with a company that has multiple sub-companies.
Yep.
And how do you allow somebody who's logged in with a particular company to only see their company's records and not see the other records as well? So.
Yep, we're running into this exact same scenario with the Fish and Wildlife Service right now, that every region should only see their acquisitions, except for about 6 people that need to be able to see. They're shared across multiple regions. I'm like, ugh, can you please help us out here? But yeah, interesting. Cool. All right.
So 2 solutions that I work on have a similar thing, but I think you maybe hinted at it earlier about using a portal and having a many-to-many relationship. And I think as you were going through it, I was kind of thinking about advantages and disadvantages to these 2 approaches. So just to back that up a little bit. So there's a table of permissions instead of a record of permissions, and that table has 1 entry for each one of these checkboxes. And then in between is a join table, so you can assign many permissions to many users, and then each combination of user and permission gets a record in the join table. And then a very similar custom function to retrieve the, you can assume you're interested in the person logging in, so you don't have to go and dig up their staff ID and stuff like that. In these cases, that's a little easier to find because we don't have to deal with the login thing that you're dealing with there. But basically you're saying, does this user have this permission? And in that case, in particular, one of those solutions is very sensitive to schema changes during work hours. So basically any field definition any calculation, any table occurrence, anything that we want to do to modify something in managed database, we have to, unless it's urgent or some kind of an emergency, we basically say we do that after hours. So if somebody during the middle of the day wanted to add a new permission, in this model you wouldn't be able to do that because that would be a schema commit by creating a new field in that permissions table. So in those cases, we're using like a code number. It's like, then they call it role, so it's R142. If you want to add R143, you can do that without having to do a commit during the day. The downside, the thing I like about this is like in that solution, we always have to go, like, I don't remember what R42 is. So we always have to go back and reference the role table to try to figure out, like, if I'm going to let somebody do this thing, what code am I testing for? And that kind of sucks. In this case, the field name gives you that answer, which is nice because you don't, if you're over in some distant part of the database and you want to pull that custom function, you don't have to remember what code it was mapped to. You know, or if we were to drop the codes, then we'd have to like type in some name exactly to match the permission name. So it's kind of thinking about the comparison between the two systems. And it looks like Jim is modeling that right now.
This is how easy it is to do with the starter solution.
Yeah, there's a couple different levels of security that you're talking about here. You know, you've got the built-in security at a user account level that's in FileMaker, you know, based on roles or the permission set. And then what this is solving like more workflow kind of things,
Yep.
which things show up on a
Which things show
layout.
up And which things, when you're running a script, check, is this person authorized to do such and such?
Right.
If not, tell
Yeah,
them.
so if you ever have the fear that somebody might see some sort of data, you want to put that definitely in the security, the actual security permissions of that user versus, I mean, because if somebody was trying to subvert that security and get access to that information through some other method, I know, talking via the data API or something, they could still see those things. They could, but so this is just a different.
You can use them together.
Right.
Yeah, so you could absolutely use that custom function in a security calculation and say, I mean, if in the ones where you have that access, so you can't use a calculation in create, but you can use a calculation in view and edit and delete. So you could say, nobody in this privilege set has the ability to delete unless you check that box. Or nobody in this privilege set has the ability to view unless you check that box. And you can kind of bake that in up front, and then the checkbox just sort of adds on some extra permission within that privilege set.
Right. So one of the goofy things where we had to do the show hide because we couldn't fully lock it off, in this case, was depending upon whether the estimate was retail price breakdown or cost breakdown, permissions had to change because of it. So, but yeah. And I've got one quick question that we can, you know, nibble on over lunch here. This same client, we've got Fish and Wildlife Service as well. They're trying to limit who gets to see records from other regions, Fish and Wildlife Service, and in this place, they just want, it's just too much. Like when I'm working, you know, at Stillwater location, I just want to see what's happening in Stillwater. And there may be some security that they don't want you to see those jobs, and it could just be, it's just too much. So if we build that into security and just say you can only see the jobs that are at your location, because you work in the Stillwater location, well then when they do a search, they can find all jobs for XYZ company. Well, Stillwater served that company and Beldenville served that company. Now all of a sudden you've got this found set of records, and a number of them say no access, no access, no access, no access. Another ones show the actual data. So the no access is really ugly. It's blatant and it's bad. It does its job, but one of the things that we're planning on doing is that when we're going to capture when people enter find mode and automatically enter their location, if there's a location-based field on whatever records they're looking at. So if I'm looking for jobs, when I enter find mode, it's going to say, oh, you're in the Stillwater, so it's going to preset the location field in that search so that when I do my search, it's always showing just the Stillwater. So that'll make it cleaner so you don't see so many no access, no access, no access. But I'm curious if anybody has any other.
In a regular search, if you don't have access, it's not going to pull
So it will omit those in the search.
The only way yes, it will, but the only way you'll get them back is like if you do a show all records, then you'll see them again.
Okay. So that will actually help if you've got multi-criteria, an and search. It will still, by default, throw that in there regardless.
But it's slower. It's slower because the search is filtering.
Right.
And that's what I'm running into. I'm doing a database where it's, we're combining, they have 10 separate databases, identical databases for 10 different offices, and we're combining, and I put a location ID for all the critical records now have a location ID, and each user has a global field saying, this is the user's location.
Mhm.
And then if those two don't equal each other, it's a calculation in the actual permissions. And I'm finding things are
In that case,
unexplainably slow all of a sudden.
one thing to test in that scenario, and I don't know the answer to this, but if the security is looking at a global field to determine what your location is, put that into a variable and then check against the variable, would that speed it up?
I will let you know.
A global field and the variable should behave the same performance-wise because they're both stored in local RAM on the user's session, inside the user's session cache.
You also want to avoid global variables for security reasons.
Yeah.
So would it be faster, John, if when we're hijacking the find mode, that we preset it with the region or the business location, and we entered that, we included that in the find mode rather than relying on FileMaker Security to automatically omit those? I'm curious the order of things. Does it perform the search and then look through and just say, should any of these be hidden?
The server shouldn't deliver you the record at all. The server should say, when you do the search, the server, I mean, assuming this is a hosted solution, the server should say, I know who that user is, so I will find the records I'm supposed to deliver the user, and then, based on the search criteria and the security, and then deliver those.
So is there an order to it of, I'm going to find all the records that first match it, and then I'm going to filter those, and then just deliver the ones that?
Well, that would be a question for Clay, but I don't.
We would have no way of knowing that
But I don't
as
think that's
average
that.
developers, right? Answering the question you just asked.
Right.
I
Maybe I
don't
should-
think that's
Without
really
talking to a
performance-wise though, because that's all happening on the server. If there's a performance issue, it's not probably about the find itself. It's probably about how many records you're delivering and what those records are showing.
But FileMaker has to do both. It has to search and it has to determine which of those two.
Yeah, but I can't imagine that there's a major performance difference between, unless you're the search that you're performing itself is a slow search. The filtering of the records based on security, unless there's a complex calculation in security, is really,
I haven't noticed a lot of performance.
that shouldn't be
Yeah.
a problem. There's a performance issue here, it's something else. It's either something inherent to the search, like if your security calculation is complex and it's using data from related records or something like that.
Mhm.
But if the location is in the record, stored in the record, and the user's location that you're referencing in security is something that should be easily available. If it's not easily available, then that could be a problem. If the security calculation says, lie to, go find the user, and then I have to go find that user's location, and then can go back and compare that to the location that's stored in the data record that you're interested in.
That would be additional work that would,
That would be a performance bottleneck. About approaching it from security, in which case pre-entering the location into the find criteria would avoid that because you'd never find a record the user wasn't supposed to see in the first
Right.
place.
So, yeah. So without talking with Clay, my imagination says, well, FileMaker server doesn't have to do anything different. All it has is stuff that is already approved to be viewed and or edited, et cetera.
Yes. if they're doing multi-criteria searches, then you'd have to figure out a way to duplicate that location across every single find record that they might.
So when you say, so it brings up an interesting question. If someone is doing and search, they've got their first, enter find mode, they type in this, and we preset the location ID, and then they say, I want a new request. Does FileMaker consider that a new find? And can we capture that and pre-populate the location ID again?
Well, what you probably want to do is like capture their exit from find mode, or capture their perform find through a custom menu or something. And I mean, you could do it with script triggers and like duplicate that every time they create a new record. You could say, well, when I leave this record, like a script trigger that's only running in find mode, and then you could capture the value that's in that location field and write it into the
Right.
next find and the next find and the next find.
And for that matter, you can capture new request, duplicate request.
Yeah, anything that's in the menu you can intercept.
That'll work.
So I think, I just did something kind of like this, and I said when I want a user to really search across two fields every time they think they're searching across one, or searching in one, because there are two places that data might exist, and they don't really need to know about that behind the scenes. And so what I did is intercepted their perform find, and then looked to see if they had put anything in any of the find requests. If they had put something in that field, then duplicate the find request and copy it to the other field.
Mhm.
And that way, if they're doing like a find and list view, they're not seeing any weird things happening, or they're not, the user is totally invisible. It happens after they construct the find, not while they're constructing the find. So you could do something like that and say, no matter what they find, no matter how they construct their search, how many different search records or search request records there are, at the end of it, go and write their location into every one of those before you execute the find.
Oh. And then the user comes along who needs to see in two locations, and they just blow everything up.
Well, but you could use that same intercept in the custom menu to handle that by saying, like, I know this user needs two locations, so now duplicate all these find records and put one location in each.
That's just tiring.
Just tell them find mode is an advanced developer feature.
Oh, very good. So this time next month, we should be talking 18. Having fun. There will be a quiz, so get ready. Thanks, everybody.